flexibility approach. And so I'm going to simply alert you to that. I don't think it's from the revisor's office, but I don't think it had, whether it's got a Senate file number yet or not, I don't see it on here. So I can't give it to you, but it should be there. It's called, the general title is Rural Broadband Authority. And the first section is Rural Broadband Infrastructure Development. And so as I understand, the first provision is to, the flexibility provision is to make it possible for local city or county authorities to issue bonds of whatever kind they determine serve their purpose without election. That would be a new kind of, as I understand it, that would be the intended flexibility. And then secondly, to add a broadband system, broadband infrastructure to that group of public projects, public work activities, housing, school districts, others, who are already included in the, if you will, credit enhancement or debt guarantee as a backstop after issuance and other pledges by city and counties. And so that's the language of the bill there, bills there for further discussion. Unless there's a particular comment on that, I'm going to move to the question on the cell phone fund. It's difficult to comment on something as vague as it is, but I feel in fairness to Senator Schmidt, I shouldn't really say any more about it. It's his baby, his bill. And so that's about, I think, as far as I should go with that. In his note to me about what he intended to bring forward today, I mentioned that he was interested in investments in wireless, and if there was a fund in the range of about $2 to $3 million, what might be some useful purposes for that in rural wireless development? Again, the focus is on rural, since, as Joanne commented when you were talking, that this many of the, not all, but frequently problems that are pointed to end up having a rural address on them. And so that's why the focus is here on the rural question. So what might be some uses? Leave aside whether you think there ought to be any kind of a tax on cell phone stuff in the first place at the state level. That's a policy issue that would certainly have to be debated by everybody who'd be voting on it. Everybody's got an opinion about it. But apart from that, if there were such a fund, how might it be useful? Might it be for more towers? Might it be, I mean, I don't know. I'm just trying to get you to think a little bit, or tell us what you think about it. Is there any use at all? You can, might see, yes?
Nelda, did he indicate whether that would be mobile wireless or fixed wireless as well?
I believe he has in mind, I don't think he has in mind one or the other at this point. I think he's interested in hearing what folks might think it would be useful. Somebody, I recall at one point, maybe a month or so ago, some people were talking about some sort of assistance for critical backhaul, some fiber backhaul that might be needed. Well, is that true? Where? Blah, blah, blah. So, so I don't think that question is closed, but how might a small fund be useful? And might it be? Any thoughts along that line?
Really too small?
Yes.
Yeah, this is my first meeting, and I think this would be an opportune time to go ahead and introduce myself, if I may.
You may, and in fact, I was standing here thinking before everyone said goodbye today, we were going to do the round robin Minnesota, here I am. But at least do tell us now who you are.
Wonderful, thank you. So, my name is Kerry Degenson. I'm the Government Associate Director for Verizon Wireless here in Minnesota. So I oversee,
welcome.
Thank you. So I oversee Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota, and until recently, when this fine young man came into our team, Iowa and Nebraska as well. So Zach Lagan here to my right will be taking over Iowa and Nebraska. So I know that you're talking about the cell phone fund, and this is exactly where I wanted to jump in and just kind of open it up to any questions that you guys might have for at least one of the wireless carriers when it comes to this particular issue.
Yeah. How do you want to say a couple of words about the wireless and rural and wireless question? I mean, there's a lot of argument that there's promises, there's things that can be delivered, there's promises that are over promises, probably can't and won't be delivered, and so on.
Sure. So, if I may, looking at wireless historically and what we've developed in the past 5 years has really overcome what we proceeded to do in the previous 10 to 15 years, right? So, with increased speeds and capabilities and things of that nature, we get the thing that I understand is coming from small town North Dakota, and I know that my hometown of 800 people, we don't have that broadband capability that we're talking about here today. So it's not like I'm sitting in my office in Minneapolis and not understanding what's happening, because I get those calls every day. I get the calls from the Public Service Commission every day talking about spotty coverage or drop calls or roaming on the Canadian border, whatever it might be. So all of those things, you do have a couple of years when it comes to those types of issues. But so really where we're at right now is developing that 4th generation technology on top of our 3rd generation technology. So every tower that we built out with that 3G type coverage will have that 4G LTE coverage by the end of June. So we really stepped up our efforts to close that gap and expand that type of service. But quite honestly, we don't know what's broken unless you guys tell us. So if you guys have those concerns or those particular areas that you think are underdeveloped, like your cabin up north, raise my hand right there, right? Or municipalities, counties. We're talking to Sibley County here about all the fiber that they're going out and building, and talking about some of those potential public-private partnerships that can help expand that for every constituent, so not just those in Maple Grove or St. Cloud.
If you got all of $2 million, what would you do?
Well, first I'd take you all out to dinner. Kidding, of course. That's a little premature, right? So we would base everything on input, need, critical need, right? So, it's a little pie in the sky at this point. But just looking at the $2 to $3 million, I think somebody, I believe it was you, said that that's not enough.
Pretty small.
Yeah, $2 to $3 million is just a drop in the bucket. You're maybe going to get redundant fiber out to a particular tower, build that up, and that's what you get.
I'm curious, when you talk about public-private partnerships, what kinds of public-private partnerships would be? So if a local rural area says, we want to move the curve ahead a little bit here,
Okay.
and let's say the state puts some money into it. They're not going to pay for the whole thing, obviously,
Sure.
but
Sure.
what would be the kind of public-private partnership that might exist? Are there some models for how that would
Yeah,
work?
absolutely. So we can take our current state and kind of work backwards from there when we're looking at, say, public safety, right? So who's aware of the FirstNet program that's being built out, right? Okay. So that was somewhat of a precursor to earlier discussions that we had with DNR and DOT, specifically about where they had infrastructure and we did not, versus where we had infrastructure and they did not, to help kind of bridge that gap when it comes to public safety response and connectivity, right? So that was one type of discussion. I wouldn't say that it led to FirstNet, right, because that's a federal issue. But those discussions were going on 3 or 4 years ago. when we're looking at FirstNet, I believe Minnesota opted in for FirstNet, correct?
Yes.
I'm not sure it's time.
Yeah, so Minnesota opted in, right? So
The application is due next week.
Right. So, looking at those areas, is it going to be built out into every single, 98% in each county? That's the goal, right? But in some of those areas where we may not be able to push that out, that's where we kind of come in and look at filling in those gaps.
Are you possibly by implication suggesting that a small fund like this, we're agreeing it's small, could would be potentially useful for quote gap filling?
So I'm not implicating it. I think that any type of discussion would have to include any other carrier that is licensed in
Sure.
those areas.
I just meant as a function as opposed to only you versus other carriers, but is that an example of a gap filler, that type of possibility?
It's an example, sure.
What kind of bandwidth are you working with? And I know that there's talk at the FCC for more spectrum, but are you looking at using more?
Well, right now, we purchased, I believe it's the 700 megahertz block, which gives us all the spectrum nationally that we're ever going to need at this point. And we're currently using that spectrum, those licenses to build out that fourth generation. Yeah, so we're pretty well set back there.
So my town in North Dakota, 1,700 people,
Okay.
huge, can't get it, then I can call you up and say,
So
where's
just
my?
curious, what town in North Dakota?
Well, it's small, it's Spearwood,
Oh, okay, sure.
it's
So
a little northeast of Jamestown.
North of Minot, yep. So yeah, I mean, the point is we have those spectrum assets, and anywhere that we currently have the tower, we're building that out in fourth generation. And since it runs at 700 megahertz versus 900, you're gonna get some broader propagation, right? And that doesn't mean that once we flip that switch, we're done putting infrastructure out in the rural areas, right? We're still looking at those areas.
I had heard a rumor some time ago, 2 or 3 years ago, you were looking at white spectrum, or white space, it's called. Have you done anything with that?
Not necessarily, certainly.
Thank you, good thoughts. Yes.
And I want to make a point of clarification here, because we had a short discussion, and he mentioned our county, and we hear this a lot. We're attempting to build a fiber to the farm network in our entire county in 10 communities. And what we hear from the incumbent is that it's going wireless, and as soon as 4G gets out here, it will replace the need for fiber. And that's not, and from my perspective, that's just not true because of reliability issues, especially in the rural areas, and distance to the tower, and bandwidth caps or data caps and things like that. But we see the wireless and the 4G as a wonderful complement to our fiber network, and the two should be working hand in hand. When you talk about what precision ag does today, they can't drag a fiber wire out in the tractor with them, but they can if they can use our access points and build this wireless network throughout the county. They can latch on to some 4G from the combine or the tractor. So just to make that a point of clarification, we're not talking, this is going to, from my perspective, I don't like what words you're about, this doesn't replace a fiber network, it complements the fiber network.
And as you build yours and you're having this relationship with the wireless people, there's always that creativity that you could do about talking to them about housing the evolved packet core functionality in your center and doing all the switching. Then you could do something very powerful.
Any other comments or thoughts about this? Some people have said that the difficulty for the rural areas and wireless is that probably the mental template for wireless infrastructure as it went out across the country was to follow, first the cities where the people are, and then down the highways. And so the difficulty comes after you're so and so many miles off the highway. And I think that that's partly what's behind this thinking about the potential positive use of a small fund. It's not going to cover Minnesota, but it might in fact demonstrate some ways in which that getting more broadly covered beyond the highway rim should be tackled. One thought might be that there'd be a kind of, as usual, in the public side, often a grants kind of thing and some kind of competition where it probably would surface some specific needs. I was very intrigued by your comments about the public safety issue. Would surface some of the things that aren't so obvious, even though we think we talk about it and know about it all the time. Yes.
I'm Kevin O'Grady with the Minnesota PUC, not speaking to the PUC, but recently we, via our wholesale agreements between Quest and a number of carriers, it was part of an agreement that was set up that Quest did meet certain wholesale requirements that we put money into a pot, and they did for a number of years until they met all those requirements, and we found ourselves sitting on $2.8 million. And of Quest's money, but we acted as distributors. And 2.8 isn't much, but we funneled all that money to schools for telecommunications purposes. And probably one of the most rewarding things I ever did, because some of these schools really, it's really important. This wasn't just, it was wireless and wireline. Some of the schools, they had cordless phones that didn't work from room to room, building to building. And we were trying to bring up sort of the people that needed it the worst.
Exactly.
Bring up the bottom. So $3 million isn't much, but if you could focus it here and there on some small grants program, you might help at the edge.
And that's a very important idea that, I mean, presumably one of the reasons you talk about this is as a public benefit, but a benefit that all people should, that you should broaden access to, then you have to think about what's the floor. How do you get people at least at the bottom somewhat to an equivalent place, and that can be demonstrated pretty quickly in schools. May not show up in every other way, but it does show in schools.
I just a general comment to it, and I'm not familiar with all the details of 1255, but I applaud the effort in general. The state should be doing more there. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a schizophrenia because we also have statutes on the books which limit municipalities and their ability to build broadband as opposed to a 65% quota. We have a proposed bill in the legislature right now that would prevent towns from developing their own networks. So that bill runs counter to and part of that bill would also strip the Public Utilities Commission of enforcing broadband development in the state. So it's kind of a...
Can you identify the number on that bill? Do you remember the number?
Senate File 584.
Roger's AT&T bill?
It's a variant, similar. I don't know if AT&T is associated with this one, but it's similar.
We were going to have some commentary on 584, and I'll have you introduce yourself and indicate needs we should do that. And I think this would be a good follow-on to what you just told.
Go ahead.
And I just focus me on maybe on that piece, and I'm Scott Bowler with Frontier. Just by way of background, that 584 bill was developed by, or say drafted, crafted, whatever, mainly by the Minnesota Telecom Alliance, of which we're not a part, but generally we support the bill. But that the issue of towns doing their own, my understanding isn't, it's not prohibited in the bill. But what that bill does is it requires kind of a more full description to the citizens about before the thing is undertaken. And I guess we're talking about rural being the areas that are, short, underserved. you would think it would help, but actually, if you're talking about a municipal operation, that actually undercuts development in rural areas. And I guess what I'm gonna say is, in most cases, the incumbent carrier serves town, because that's where the money is, that's where the people are. And because it serves the town, it can, there's revenue, there's money, there's business to extend to the farm that's not in the town that's, 4 miles away. So there's money to extend the system that far. If one is faced with a municipal entity that's just providing service in town where prices or costs are low and people are, that's going to undercut the incumbent's revenue because they're going to be competing, and we have to be, they're going to be losing business in town, which will undercut their ability to have any resources to spend out in the rural areas. So I think you guys take a kind of a bigger view than just the town itself to the exclusion of the rural areas. I think we saw an example of that a year or two ago, maybe it's more than that now, up on the Iron Range, where a number of municipalities wanted to get together to serve their town. Well, that might help the town. It would certainly seriously adversely impact the incumbents up there who were serving the rural areas. So that, the net effect would have been, town might have got something, but the folks who lived outside of town were going to be losing. Would be damaged by that kind of situation. So,
And I
there's
agree
a lot of
with
things
that.
go on.
I agree with that logic and analysis. I think that's very much the case. But at the same time, cable can move into those small towns unencumbered in the same way and have the same effect.
They are. And those folks, there's at least 2 competitors already. The phone company and the cable company in town already.
So the argument is why target the town alone as opposed to.
The flip side of that is that if you, sometimes the only provider that wants to step forward and provide high quality service is the municipal government. And not allowing in a competitor can prevent the town from getting the service. It does raise the question Scott raised about more rural, but to prevent somebody coming into town also prevents the town from.
Kim, you mentioned you mentioned 2 things that you thought that bill harbored that should be alerted to.
One was that presently there are what we call A4 companies, alternative form of regulation. There are, and I think there are 3 biggest landline companies in the state. And these A4s are sort of like a contract with the state. Every 3 years approximately, they come in and set rates, and there's agreements on rates and quality of service. And once these agreements are met, the company can, if it makes a great profitable rate, that's great for the company. It's more concerned about some quality of service and some rates. But part of that process, there's specific language that allows the Public Utilities Commission to watch for, manage, encourage high-speed infrastructure build-out. And we would have, in the give and take of developing a need for every couple of years, that would be a factor that the Commission explicitly can look at and suggest that maybe you should spend here as opposed to there, or more as opposed to less. It's not, it doesn't give us specific guidelines, but it definitely gives us authority to discuss those issues and put some pressure on the company.
And this is to be removed? Is this what
Yes.
Yes, so the general oversight, which I take it that would be the right way to describe it.
What's called the A4 language within
Yes.
is gone.
And that oversight then would be removed out of your policy.
And I think there's another piece of the statute which is more goal-oriented, which would be stricken too, because it requires the Commission to take into account infrastructure.
Okay. So those are some things that you noted.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to bring up the tension between what
Yeah.
that 1255
Good
does and what
discussion.
584 does.
Yeah. Scott, did you want to say anything more about 584?
Sure, let me just go a little bit longer. And I guess the background here is, or at least from our perspective, environment we're sitting in, and as Kevin rightly notes, you know, the laws were written that are in place, have been in place for a long time. And at one point, the wireline providers were subject to that PUC oversight, were the only game in town. And so there was a need for the commission to kind of keep an eye on things because they were the only game in town. Flash forward to today, we're not the only game in town anymore. We're just about the smallest part of the game in town. We've got, I was looking, about 2/3 of the lines in this state are wireless lines. About half of the wire lines are incumbent, and the other half are cable companies, VoIP, whatever. So, you know, the marketplace that we're competing in, you know, we're about 1/5 of it, or 1/4 of it. We're the ones that are being regulated, oversight, reporting to the commission. Everybody else is free to do what they want, or free to make the best decisions for them, for their business, which puts us at a disadvantage. When I came to the state in 2000, we had about 200,000 access lines, just about 120,000 access lines now. So, you know, we've lost our market share and our ability to really, say control the market, but we're no longer the dominant force that we once were. So I think it's important for the regulation to reflect that so that we can compete on the same kind of level and with the same abilities and flexibilities that we're competing against. You know, in terms of, and you're right, the commission isn't going to be able to tell us, you know, what your answer time is supposed to be and stuff. Well, you know, customers today are choosing companies that have none of those obligations, and they're happy to choose them. You know, is it 1/3? Maybe it's more than 1/3 of customers don't have a landline anymore. They're perfectly happy with the cellular service they have. So it doesn't seem necessary to us to have some kind of more strict requirements that apply to this set of folks, but the market doesn't really care about that. You know what I'm saying? So.
You're
And I
just
take
lucky
it-
you're not in the bookstore.
And I take
That's
it.
right. You know, times change.
I take it the underlying point is that 584 is intended to somehow remove what are regarded as obstacles
Right, and
from the wireline telephone carriers.
Yes, it's intended to get the commission's regulatory thumb off the bulk of phone service. It retains, however, the commission's oversight over what is often, at least in my discussions, called grandma service. Basic R1, B1 service still is under the commission's purview in terms of that. You know, but all the other services we offer, the bundles and the data services and all that kind of stuff, let's let the market.
I'm just reacting to the matter of vocabulary. You may have to find a whole nother hook to hang that grandma
Well, I'm
notion
gonna
on, because 65% of seniors are now not only on broadband, but you'll find them on Facebook, and you'll find them in Twitter, and you'll find them on text messaging and everywhere else. And so, you know,
So the need for
I
the
think you need
commission to-
another image there these days. Yes.
Is that Sarah? That it's in
All our service, yes, those services care.
that one?
Well, all of our retail voice services now are tariff.
Yeah, but I mean with this
Well,
change,
It would still be tariff.
Yeah.
just that grandma line.
And some other wholesale services, just generally, I don't want to call it grandma line, but
Yeah.
bare R1
Right.
basic service.
So if the idea is more competition, then that
Yes.
inevitably, I mean, that's
it's
to
not-
make you have no more regulation than the other competitors, that's what
But
you're.
we still would have more.
I mean, but that's
less
what your
onerous.
goal is, yeah. Okay, so, and that's in the name of trying to even out competitive conditions. And presumptively, that's not intended to be an anti-competitive move. And presumably then, when there are new entrants in the way of counties or cities, that it ought to be the case that they could enter. Were you going to comment? I saw your hand.
Well, I was going to make 2 comments. I want to be careful. First, I want to introduce myself to some folks that don't know. My name is Mark Erickson. I'm the city administrator and EDA director of the little town of Winthrop in Sibley County. I'm also involved in a what's called the RS Fiber project, where we're trying to build fiber to the farm and fiber to 10 cities. And from the municipal perspective, and that was the phone perspective, and we understand that, and we know that they face some tough competition, but we come from, and Bill Black, the MMUA lobbyist is here, so I want to be careful what I say. The cities come from the perspective, as far as I'm concerned, is we don't care who brings us the technology. And here's the second point I'm going to make first. It's about fiber optics. It's not about copper to your house anymore, I'm sorry. It's about wireless to your house, and it's about fiber to your house, because that's what the promise is. It's the bandwidth, it's everything. It's not distance limited, it's all kinds of advantages. But we would love the phone companies and or the cable companies to invest in our communities and in our area and build a fiber optic line. And in fact, and I don't want to go too far with this, we sat down with Scott and Frontier and CenturyLink and MediaCom and our local phone company and said, please do this for us. And they said, and we understand why, they just can't. I mean, we understand that, but then we also said, we're willing to put the money out and build the network and let you operate it. And that's how bad we don't want to operate it. And for reasons that we understand, they're unable to do that. So from our perspective, we say, all right, if no one else is able to do it, then we should be able to do it, because we're looking out for our citizens. We're looking out for our schools and our senior citizens and our ag producers. The promise is what you can do with the bandwidth, and the bandwidth is all about fiber and 4G. So that makes sense. And I understand Scott, and I agree with them, and he's in a tough spot these days, and we'd love to work with him. We've had those conversations, but it's a conundrum. You know, I don't know how you figure it out. We just think our cities in the rural parts of the state need to be served with the new technology, because more than 150 communities all across the nation are building fiber to the home networks now, and there's going to be many, many more that do it. So we need to find a way to public-private partnership. We think that's great.
Well, that was a segue from the wireless discussion. Yes.
I guess we're supposed to introduce ourselves. So
Yes, let's do that, because I see, before you run out of the room, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Dave Minke, I'm the Pine County Administrator.
Thank you for coming.
Nice to meet all of you, but I have never run out of the room.
And let's go around, and do you have a comment, and do you want to make first, and then
Yeah.
we'll do the, and then close the
It's
program?
actually not a comment. My name's Mike Reardon. I work for the city of St. Paul as their broadband and cable. I'm the cable officer for the city, but I also serve as the president for the Minnesota Association of Community Telecommunications Administrators, which we represent many local municipalities and local governments and cable, dealing with cable and broadband issues. I have a general, it seems like this is a good audience to ask, and this is just a general question that I want to throw out there, and it will reflect my naivety, however you say the darn thing, my ignorance. I've been around this business long enough to know that everybody says they're being unfairly regulated in some manner. You know, if you get the cable company, they'll say we have to pay franchise fees and yada yada. You get the phone companies, and you get the fact that you got to pay tariffs, and you know, and they're all unfairly regulated in some manner. My curious question is, and it's been difficult to level the playing field because everybody doesn't want the playing field level. They all want to tilt it towards their side. If the cities, the counties, and the state basically got out of what is called regulation and simply allowed everybody to compete, but everybody had to pay the same amount for the lines that go through the rights of way, because that's truly the only public land, or any public land, wherever it is. Because if you guys wanted to, if you guys didn't want to deal with the cities or the counties, you could build through everybody's personal property and pay them. But if everybody just made it equal, that there was a flat charge, whatever you want to call it, a percent of gross revenue or per foot or whatever, but if you're a phone company, you're a cable company, or Verizon or whatever, you still need the backhaul. and you still need the towers, and the tower's on public property, there's so much you're gonna pay. But you're gonna have to pay for that. My curious question is that something that everybody would just say that's insane? Because to me, it seems the only way to level it is, again, I'm ignorant here, so I'm just curious, some thoughts from those representing industries here or regulators.
There are always customers that are very expensive to serve, typically in the country. And no one would want to use that right away to go to that customer unless there was some return. They would abandon the right away and just not serve it, unless there's a requirement.
Well, I'm not saying, you would compete, I mean, you could build it wherever you wanted to. I mean, there would be, it'd be the same as today, someone's gonna serve them.
But
But if you need the 911 service and that sort of stuff is what you're talking
Yeah,
to.
someone
Yes.
any kind of service. He's
Any
saying,
kind of service.
you're saying
Why
some
would
wouldn't.
a company pay for right away when all we do is turn around and charge the city, the people that live in the city for it? What happens to the money that we pay for the right away?
And this is why I always love this argument, is that the customer always pays.
Yeah.
Always.
If you know, you go broke.
The company doesn't pay, the consumer always is going to pay. But I'm just trying to figure out if there's a way to get this argument of competition so there is an equality, and so there's just some sort of fairness to it, and I've been trying to figure out for years, what is that denominator that would be fair?
And I don't know that there is, this is ignorance on my part, I don't know if there is a difference in the right-of-way costs if you're a cable carrier burying it or a phone company burying it.
Right.
I don't know that there's a difference in the city's charge, so.
If you look around the country, probably the easiest comparable is Overland charges, and they vary all over the place. So you have a similar kind of thing there. I mean, that would be what I would give you as a comparative way of looking at it.
One of the paradoxes of leveling the playing field is that if it's an unlevel playing field is what actually drives competition. When wireless comes in, it means something for the wireline. They have to do something different to respond. Everybody looks for their niche. And in a sense, a level playing field is not possible and not necessarily desirable.
If you had it, you'd probably have a monopoly or an administered environment.
And I guess.
But we have monopolies now in a lot of
No, I mean true monopoly.
There's no shortage of competition in this.
Well,
Well, it's an oligopoly in most arenas, and to most homes, it's a duopoly. I mean, so it's
I
not
disagree with
exactly, to most places, it's two wires. Maybe if you
Too
count
many wires.
wires and then wireless.
And then this guy.
So we've got three access points, which is
Just about
generally
everywhere now, you've
an
got more
oligopoly.
and more wireless data flowing. So that's three competitors that you
Right.
have to assume at this point.
And that generally fits the definition of an oligopoly. One a monopoly, 2 to 3 is an oligopoly. So we don't have a wide range of competitors, but there is some competition. And then the question is how the public factor, I mean, why does the public get mixed in? Because interests, because those who provide services, whether it's a public provider or a private provider, go to try to protect their backs.
Well,
Well, there's one
And
more
so-
thing that you said three competitors, but you were
There's more
saying
than that.
you've got the wireline telephone, you've got the cable, and you've got the wireless. So you've really got one in each category, and each of those categories, while they might be able to provide a full set of services, has characteristics that are beneficial or problematic for different customers.
Hmm.
So it's not even, that's not even a fair comparison. It's an apples and oranges comparison in some way.
I
Yes,
agree with Scott, I mean, the old landline companies in the state, they're not as well positioned. They've got wireless out there that has tremendous advantage of mobility, and cable was sitting in a very nice position when the internet came along. And companies like Scott's are sitting there, neither of those advantages. And the legacy of the regulator having some control there. And so I don't want to disagree with Scott, I agree with that, but from the regulator's perspective at least, if they're looking at public interest, is how do we make sure that everybody gets some basic level? Now, And that's a tough question, because if all the companies did exactly what they wanted to, I believe there would be customers who wouldn't get service out there, or very good service. And so, in getting that, serving that public interest, a good communication network for all, there has to be some kind of way to do that. And right now, unfortunately, like, say Frontier, CenturyLink, the old landlines are placed, they're not well placed to do that. They have us leaning on them in a way, forcing them to serve in a world where cable and wireless will be
Any last one or two comments, and then we'll go around and find out who we've all been talking to.
One of the things that, in support of Scott, and I don't know the exact number, but this is a real commissioner's problem. In the state of Iowa, 40% of the telephone companies are losing money, the local telephone companies. So the bigger problem is how you're going to keep them running so there is service in that area, I think, because 40% of them are losing money.
It is an interesting point, and there's been a little bit more public recognition that in a decade there may well be black areas of the country. The lights will go out from the point of view of.
Well, it's the commission's job to make sure they don't.
Yeah. Compulsory bills? I don't think so. Any other last comment? Well, thank you. You've been really great, and we'll.